Now we're in the midst of a sermon series called "The Pursuit of Hope," and today I want us to look at probably one of the. If I said that there are probably three parables of the best-known parables in the world, I just wonder what your list would be. My thinking is that it's the Good Samaritan, the woman at the well, and the prodigal son. Now, today we're going to look at the prodigal son because I want to look at hope when you hurt as a parent, hope for hurting parents. And this is probably, if not the best, one of the best known parables that Jesus spoke, and it comes from Luke the 15th chapter. So we'll look at it in just a second. But what does prodigal mean? What's the word prodigal mean? We all know the parable of the prodigal son, but what does anybody have an idea of what prodigal actually means? It means. Anybody want to take a shot? Take a guess. What?
Strayed, like you strayed away?
No. It means wasteful. And it doesn't just mean wasteful, it means extravagantly wasteful. That's what the word prodigal means. And Jesus tells this story, and it's called the prodigal son, the extremely wasteful son. And we all know the plot, but let's look at the text. It comes from Luke's Gospel, the 15th chapter, verses 11 through 24. So let's read it together. It says, "Then he said, a certain man had two sons, and the younger of them said to his father, 'Father, give me the portion of goods that falls to me.' So he divided to them." Now, I want you to notice something that I've never heard another preacher lift up in a sermon on the prodigal son. And this just came to me in the study. He divided to them. He didn't just give to one because he asked for it, but he gave both of his sons. To them his livelihood. And not many days after, the younger son gathered all together, journeyed to a far country, and there wasted his possessions with prodigal living, with extremely, extravagantly wasteful living. But when he had spent all, there arose a severe famine in that land, and he began to be in want. Then he went and joined himself to a citizen of that country, and he sent him into his fields to feed swine. And he would gladly have filled his stomach with the pods that the swine ate, and no one gave him anything. Wait a minute. Where were his friends? Where were his friends? But when he came to himself, and I heard a preacher say one time, this is the reason that you know that he didn't even have any clothes, because the parable says when he came to himself. Okay, enough humor. He said, "How many of my father's hired servants have bread enough to spare, and I perish with hunger? I will arise and go to my father, and will say to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you, and I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants.' And he arose and came to his father. But when he was still a great way off, his father saw him, and had compassion, and ran and fell on his neck and kissed him. And the son said to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and in your sight, and am no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his servants, 'Bring out the best robe and put it on him, and put a ring on his hand and sandals on his feet, and bring the fatted calf here and kill it, and let us eat and be merry. For this my son was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.' And they began to be merry." Now, may God add the blessing of understanding to the reading of his word. The parable goes on because this is a parable about the lost. Somebody said that in Luke's Gospel, the 15th chapter, there are four things that are lost. And it's known as the chapter of the lost. It's the chapter of the lost sheep, the lost coin, and the lost sons. And one can be as lost as the other, because being a member of the household. But we're going to look this morning when I want to present to you hope for when you hurt as a parent in pursuit of hope. I want to look at what happens with when somebody closest to us hurts us. Now, I often tell young couples when in premarital counseling, as we're getting ready to do that blessed event of marriage, I often tell them nobody can hurt you any deeper than those that you let closest into you. When you're married, your children, your family, your very, very close friends, other people can hurt you, but they can only get so deep. The people that hurt you the most deeply are the people that you love the most. Now, when it comes to family, our spouses, our children, our relatives, they can be unkind, they can be ungrateful. And this, I believe, is a story that gives us hope for parents when we hurt. It's not just It's not just a lesson about God's love. It's a story about parenting. And I'm not an authority on parenting. In fact, I like Dr. Charlie Shedd. Was a great Presbyterian preacher. He was an author. He wrote a lot on parenting in the home and family stuff. Debbie and I had the chance to work with Dr. Shedd on 2 occasions, and once was here at Epworth on St. Simon's Island. But Charlie Shedd had this quote. He said that he used to do a parenting when he was single. He used to do a seminar on parenting when he was single. It was called How to Raise Your Children. And then he said after he got married, he changed the title to some suggestions for parents. Then after he had his first kid, he changed the title to Feeble Hints to Fellow Strugglers. And then he said after he had 3 kids, he quit giving the lecture. He quit giving the seminar. Now, I like the one about the lady that got on a bus with 5 children. And the bus driver said to her, "Lady, are they all yours or is it a picnic?" And she said, "They're all mine. It's no picnic." Anyway. Oh, and I like the one about the daddy who said, the mother who, when the daddy took the son to school, said, "Did Billy cry when you took him to school today?" And he said, "No, but his teacher did." Okay. Anyway, how can we take hope? How can we get hope as parents from this particular story? And I tell couples, as I said in premarital counseling, nothing changes your life. Nobody can hurt you as deeply, but nothing changes your life. We look at, in premarital counseling, how that there are 3 stages that every marriage goes through. There's the honeymoon stage, the stage of mutual distrust, and then the stage of mutual love and trust. And I'm going to spell this out one day in my book, but in those 3 stages, you find yourself, the first time that people are married, those stages can last periods of years. Now, whenever you go through major trauma in an existence or in a relationship, as family, as friends, losing a job, losing family, losing a loved one, and so on, changing things, then you go through those stages all over again. Much shorter time span, but you do find yourself going through those time span. But there is a proposition about life that nothing changes your life like children do, and we need to understand how to deal with children and to have hope sometimes, especially when they reach the age of accountability. And that's why Jesus tells this story. This story is an incredible story because there are so many dynamics to it. We can't begin to cover it in 20 minutes or so, but there's some things that I want us to pick up on this morning because there are things that we see around us. Now, you may not be experiencing this. You may have experienced it, but I would probably say to you unequivocally that you know somebody who is experiencing the things that are expressed in this particular parable this morning. And the first thing that I want us to look through, you know the story, we've read the story. The father divided his livelihood, the word says, and that literally means in the Hebrew, his possessions. He divided his possessions among the 2 boys, 2 in his household. Now, the interesting thing is that the oldest was to receive double the share of the younger. In other words, 2/3 of the father's goods were supposed to go to the oldest son, and then 1/3 of the possessions. So the boy takes his, and he becomes extravagantly wasteful in a far country. Now, I want us to look first of all at the stages of rebellion. What are the stages of rebellion in a family and in a child's life and in a young person's life and so on? Now, the first stage of rebellion is failure to recognize parental authority. Failure to recognize parental authority. Now, there is, I would venture to say that every one of us who have had children have experienced this. There's a struggle that begins at birth. There is a struggle that begins at birth. Who is going to be in control of this life? Who is going to be in control of this life that has come into our existence? Is it going to be the child? Is it going to be the parent? And I would venture to say to you, you see, very often as our children grow up, I saw this with mine, they want control sooner than we're willing to give it as parents, see. They want it as soon as they can have it. But I would venture to say to you that there is a struggle for control in a person's life that ultimately has spiritual consequences. In other words, if a child begins to recognize authority when they're young and when they recognize parental voices, when they recognize parental authority and direction in their life, they are going to be sooner to open up to that spiritually with God than they will be if left to their own devices. if they are left unattended, if they are left with parents who say, we don't care. Now, the first step in rebellion, let's take a child who has reached the age of accountability, which this young man was in this story. Now, I meant to preface the words to the study of this particular parable by saying to you that Jesus said, a certain man. This was an illustration from experience. This was not a story that was made up. Now, several of the paragraphs, as you notice the canonical Gospels, as you read through the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, you will find that Jesus sometimes tells a story. He'll use natural illustrations to illustrate spiritual truth, but there are times when he deals with persons and personalities that he will tell you, there was a man named Lazarus. There was a certain man who planted a vineyard. This was a certain man. In other words, Jesus could have said his name. He knew the man. He knew the story. He knew it intimately because he's the God of all and knows all. Now, the second stage in rebellion, first of all, is the failure to recognize parental authority. And children need to be taught from an early age that there is a promise. There's only one commandment with promise. Of the 10 commandments that were given on Mount Sinai, there is one commandment with a promise attached to it. And that is to honor your father and your mother, that your days may be long on this earth. That is the only commandment with promise. And I tell people, I'm 62 years of age, it is incumbent upon me as the son of my mother who is still living to honor my mother. I don't live under her household. She doesn't direct my life like she did when I was growing up. But I honor her. I honor her for who she is. Now, I'll tell you, some great conflicts that happen is when children have not been raised in a good atmosphere, when they have not been raised under godly guidance. And then people will say to me, how am I supposed to honor my parents when they did wrong by me? I was abused by my parents. And I will tell you that long after you are out of the household authority of a parent, that it is incumbent upon you to honor them in every way possible as long as they live in this life, as long as they live on this planet. And if you do, God will bless that. And we can talk about specifics, and if we do need to talk about specifics, you can come and see me, and I may have some suggestions about how you do that in difficult situations whenever in your mind or in anyone else's mind they don't deserve it. They don't deserve it. But there is no restriction on this, and there's no restriction on this commandment with promise. Now, the second step in the stages of rebellion is impatience. Impatience. Want it now. Want it now. This is what the son was saying to the father. Give to me now. You see, this was an act that was reserved in under Hebrew law and Old Testament law for the time of death of the father. Then the estate was divided among the living sons, the oldest receiving the majority. So here's this son. He is impertinent. He doesn't honor his father. He doesn't honor the fact that his father is still his authority, both his spiritual authority and his natural authority, as long as he is living under his household. He does not recognize that at all. And he says, Father, give me. Now here is the seat. Here is the classic issue. This is the classic point of conflict in families. Give me. Give me. Give me now. If we don't help our children understand what delayed gratification can mean to them, then we will never teach them how to wait upon the Lord. See, when we wait upon God, we'll renew our strength. We'll mount up with wings as eagles. We'll run and not be weary. We'll walk and not faint. In the heat of the day is what he's talking about. But you see, delayed gratification is something that our society knows little of. Little of. We talk about how things are supposed to be in a bad way economically. And then I watch these commercials on TV. And it will be ungodly during the Super Bowl to know how many millions they're paying for 30-second commercials on the most watched sports event in the history of the world, which will be the Super Bowl. There's money out there. There's money somewhere. And it amazes me to watch these commercials for Mercedes and for Audis and things like that. I think, who are they, developing these commercials for? I mean, is there a mass market in our nation for a Mercedes E350? I don't know. Must be. I mean, they pay a lot of money to advertise for people to buy them. Okay. Anyway, want it now. Instant gratification. We need to teach our children delayed gratification. But then thirdly, And I've already edged into it. The stages of rebellion: failure to recognize parental authority, impatience, and give me. Now, impatience is wanting it now, but give me. The son was fed up with the farm. Now, what is the response of the family? What is the response of a parent? Now, when a child is an adult, if they are adults, now I would say to you, and this can take so many different forms, and I have agonized with families through this. I have gone to the bus station with people, literally. I have chased a child to another state. Don't have time to develop all of that. But to let you know that when I say that the response, the wise response of this parent was to let his adult child go. Let them go, if they are adults. If they are children, you fight. You fight with everything that is every parental instinct that you have to keep them. I mean, even if you have to get the law involved, you fight. Because they are too young, they are minors, they can be hurt, and they will be hurt. So you fight with everything that a parent possesses that makes them a parent. But when they're adults, and they can make their own decisions, you let them go. You let them go. Secondly, you let them make their own mistakes. You let them make their own mistakes. That is so hard to do. You can see it coming. My father often told me he thought that I had the ability to look into the future in a way that few people had. And I respected that because my father was one of my very best friend, but he was also my spiritual mentor. And I respected that from him. But it hurts whenever you think that you can see what's coming, and you may know, just as sure as you're standing there, what's coming down your child's path. But they are going to make the mistake. And you have to let them make their own mistakes. And number three, in the response, first of all, let them go, let them make their own mistakes, but thirdly, let them reap the consequences. You see, this is one of those places where natural law and spiritual law come together and use the same language for the law. And you say, what are you talking about? Well, there's spiritual law that has to do with the Spirit and coming to life with the Spirit. There's natural law that has to do with, it says that gravity pulls things down. But there's natural law and spiritual law that comes together and uses the same language, and that language is very simply this: what you reap, you're going to sow. See, it doesn't matter whether it's spiritual language or natural language. What goes into the ground is going to grow. What goes into the heart is going to come out. What you sow is what you're going to reap in life. And children, and our adult children, need to understand that there are consequences. And God help us if we are an enabler for adults. Help us, Lord, to understand that sometimes people and our children have to hit the bottom. Jesus said he got to the place where he put himself out to a Gentile who was raising pigs. What could be worse for a young Jewish boy? The carob plant is probably the husks that were being used to feed the pigs. And he's eating carob husks. How much lower can you get? How much more bottom can there be? You know, and on the parent side, what do we deal with? What did the father deal with? A little bit, and we could throw out a lot of things here, but just to say that, you know, we hurt for them. We may be embarrassed. There's some guilt. Sometimes a lot of guilt, and I think that Satan many times wants to heap guilt on us as parents whenever adult children make their own choices. And we don't need to live with that guilt. Guilt is something that Satan wants us to walk around with when it's not necessary. When anything that has been a trespass can be forgiven. Now, the second point that I want you to see in this one to establish hope for parents is to see the inevitable re-examination. There is a wonderful promise in God's Word that says, train up a child in the way that they should go. When they're old, they'll not depart from it. Now listen, the life in the dash, you know, there's a beginning year and the year that a person dies, and there's the dash. And somebody's written a book called Life in the Dash. Well, the difference between when a child is young and they're training and when they're old coming back to the truth, that period of time in between can be agonizing. It can be years. It can be heart-rending. It can be the cause for many wet pillows at night. But there's a promise that parents need to hold on to. When they are old, they will not depart from it. Now, I have faced parents, have looked parents in the eye who said to me, I'm here to tell you I didn't do that. I didn't do that. I came to Christ as an adult, and I did not train up a child. Listen, that does not mean, because we live in the world that is the most blessed spiritually. 80% of the gospel that's preached in the world is preached in this country. And children are going to hear it, particularly adults are going to hear it. And so you pray, and you wait patiently. And I'll come to that in just a minute here. But the thing is that we need to understand that we still have this hope. Because you see, when you go through bad experiences, and particularly when you hit the bottom, and people will tell you who are in NA or AA, they'll just tell you, I had to hit the bottom. I hit the bottom. And sometimes when people hit the bottom, there's nowhere to look but up. God is there. God is there. And that is the hope that we have. There is going to be the inevitable re-examination on the part of anybody who goes through difficult things in life, and especially rebellion. They're going to be they're going to have that conscience. And I love those words. I have put my conscience in Dante's Inferno. God says in that magnificent piece of literature, I have put my candle, conscience, in man's breast. The conscience is there. It's constantly working. And there will be the inevitable re-examination, just as there was with the prodigal son. Then the scene of the return. The last point that I want to look at very quickly this morning is the scene of the return. I want you to see this as a Hebrew father. We sometimes show, yeah, that's good, Rachel, thank you for the picture, because you see the father has a flowing robe there. Now what there's not just exactly an accurate depiction of is that when a Hebrew, now remember, this is a landowner, this is a wealthy man. He's already given away a third of his estate, and he's still operating well. And this is a man who would take his robe. If he's going to run, he's going to snatch that robe up, and he's going to tie it up with a band around his waist so that his legs are exposed and he can run. Because you can't run in a robe. I wear a robe at the 11 o'clock service. You can't run in a robe. I can tell you that right now. But a Hebrew man, a gentleman, a statesman, a landowner, the most undignified thing in the world that a man of means could do was to run. And yet Jesus, I think, points out very specifically, because he wants us to see a picture of the Father who is waiting in heaven, who is watching for us, and the Father runs to meet the Son. He's grabbed that robe up and he's tied it around his waist, because you see, every day he goes out in the morning and he's looking, he's waiting for that Son to come over the hill. And that's the hope that we have as parents. They're going to come back. They can come back. And the thing is, do you go to the hill and look every morning? See? That's the point. That's the point. Do you go to the hill and look? Are you watching for the return? Are you praying for the return? And oh boy, that scene is unparalleled in Scripture. The Father runs to meet the Son. And the Word says that he falls on his neck and he kisses him. Now, love two ways in the return and the redemption. Hold on to a return. There can be a return. Now, what might the Father have said? He could have waited there for that boy to come back. See, I told you so. Isn't this what I tried to tell you when I was raising you as a young man? You didn't listen, did you? How many times have we heard those things? That's not what happens, you see. And that's not what God does to you. When you come back to him, if you've done something that you've been disobedient, then he's waiting. He doesn't say, see, I told you so. He's already told you so in this, see. He doesn't need to say it again. All he needs is for you to come back to him, and he'll fall on your neck and kiss you too, see. Here's the scene of return. Love two ways. Love faithfully. How do you love faithfully? How do you love your children faithfully? Well, first of all, you pray, you commit them to God, and you wait patiently. Those three things. You pray for them. You commit them to God, and you wait patiently. And I would say to you, maybe there's another one on this, and that is go to the door and look. Go to the door and look. Show God that you're serious about the prayers that you're putting up for your children. And secondly, love unconditionally. Here's the thing. When this return and redemption scene is incredible, Because the Father says to the Son, you know, the Son has these three realizations. My Father's servants live better. I've sinned against my Father, and I'm going to rise and go to him. He doesn't get through but two of those when he says to the Father, look, I know the servants live better than me, and I've sinned against you. And the Father cuts him off right there, and he says, bring a robe, bring a ring, put it on his finger. Restore him to the relationship that he had when he left this household. He was the second in command in the household as the second son. And the Father put a ring on him. He restores him completely. And then forgive completely. Love two ways, faithfully, unconditionally. Forgive completely. Completely. He gave responsibility back to his son. He's restored him to wholeness. Listen, do you know what happens to people who can't get an understanding of being restored to wholeness? Not realizing that there's forgiveness for them, they fall prey. They fall prey to someone who will come into their life and give them direction. That's why when especially young ladies run away and they'll get on a bus and go to California or go to Florida, and there are wolves that are waiting, and they watch at bus stations when young single girls get off the bus. Because you see, they've been rebellious, but they need somebody to make decisions for them. And so they fall prey. They fall prey in our society. I have a nephew who's begun to sing with the Irish group Blue Tree. And they are fighting. They are a Christian group. They're an alternative Christian group. It's a head-banging music. But he is traveling with them all over the world now, and they are fighting the sex trade in Cambodia with everything that they are. Children are being sold 3, 4, and 5 years of age to slave traders. They are used up by the time they are 10 and 11 and thrown onto the streets or put to death. And Blue Tree, this Irish alternative Christian band, they have tunnel vision on this because they believe that God has called them to fight this. And that's exactly what they're doing. I admire it. Frankly, I admire it. Now, restore to wholeness. Now, just briefly, the other son, what did he say? What did the father say to the other son? Well, first of all, I'm skipping around, I'm sorry. Just want to finish up here quickly. Now, what did the kid learn? What did the kid learn? First of all, you can't buy friendship with your money. Secondly, you can impress people who don't care about you with money. You can impress people who don't care about you with money. But people who care about you, they're not impressed with your money. See? They're not. What happened to the kid after he had gone in this extravagantly wasteful way of living? And what happened when he had need? There wasn't anybody for him. Where were all of his friends? I mean, he bought drinks for everybody. See? He paid for the prostitutes. I mean, he had provided parties for people. But now he was in need. Y'all, I'll be careful here. I can give you some local illustrations. I could give you some local illustrations of people who lived a high life on the island. And when they fell, they fell. And you know what? There wasn't anybody there for them. But God was waiting with outstretched arms. One little girl said, her daddy was telling her the story of the prodigal son and said, what did you learn from this? And she said, well, Daddy shouldn't have left home without his credit card. So sometimes you can be too young to get all of the truth. But what did the older son say? Now, and we're not going to take time to look at the older son except to say this. The father said to him, when he complained, when he whined, he was jealous of the son that returned. But here's the thing that I want you to understand. Jesus said to him, or Jesus said about him, the father said, all that I have is yours. In other words, it's at your disposal. What I have is yours. Listen, some of us are living like servants in the Father's house. We ought to be living like sons. Because you see, when the lost son came home, the Father restored him to his perfect relationship, what he should have had in the household. The first son was living beneath his privilege. Don't live beneath your privilege. Don't give up the Father's house, first of all, but certainly don't live beneath your privilege in the Father's house. Now, are we going to be able to sing or should we close? Okay.